Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty and watched the stars through the main window. His ship was the biggest and strongest vessel that humanity had ever built. The metal walls around him hummed with power from the engines below. Today felt different from other days. Today would change everything for the human race. The communication officer turned to face him. Her name was Lieutenant Sarah Blake, and she had been working on the ship for 3 years. She looked worried as she checked her equipment one more time. The screens in front of her showed signals coming from deep space. These were not normal signals. They came from beings that humans had never met before. Admiral Kate Sullivan walked onto the bridge. She was the highest-ranking military person in all of human space. Her uniform was clean and pressed. Her face showed no fear, but Jake could see tension in her eyes. Behind her came Dr. Alex Carter, who studied alien life forms. He carried a small device that would record everything that happened. The main screen in front of them began to glow. Strange colors swirled across its surface. Then the colors formed into shapes. The shapes became clear images of creatures that looked nothing like humans. Some were tall and made of what looked like crystal. Others had scales like giant lizards. Some had tentacles instead of arms. All of them looked powerful and dangerous. The crystal being at the center of the group began to speak. Its voice came through machines that turned alien words into human language. The voice was cold and without feeling. It sounded like someone who had never been told no in their entire life. The creature said it was the prime speaker of the Galactic Council. It told them that 12 different alien races ruled the galaxy. They had been in charge for 10,000 years. Every other species in the galaxy followed their rules without question. Now they had learned about humans and they were not happy. The prime speaker explained that humans had done things they were not allowed to do. Humans had built colonies on 17 different worlds without asking permission first. Humans had also built weapons that were too powerful for such a young species. The council had rules about these things, and humans had broken those rules. A large reptile creature stepped forward. It had scars all over its body from many battles. This was the Thrakari war chief. It spoke in a voice that sounded like rocks, grinding together. The war chief said that humans would be punished for breaking the rules. The punishment would be severe. Humans would have to give the council half of everything they made in their factories. They would also have to give away most of their military ships. Worst of all, 1 million humans would be taken away to work as slaves in council mining colonies on distant worlds. Sarah Blake felt her hands shake as she recorded these demands. The aliens talked about enslaving humans like they were discussing the weather. It was clear they had done this many times before to other species. Jake Morrison looked at his crew and saw fear in their eyes. But he also saw something else. He saw anger. The screen showed images of dead planets. These had once been home to other species that had refused to obey the council. Now they were nothing but burned rocks floating in space. Cities that had held millions of people were turned to glass. Forests and oceans were gone forever. The message was simple and clear. Do what we say or we will kill everyone. The prime speaker gave humans 72 hours to decide. If humans agreed to the demands, they would be allowed to live as servants of the council. If they refused, every human colony would be destroyed. Earth itself would be attacked until most of its people were dead. Only enough humans would be left alive to serve as workers for the alien masters. Dr. Carter studied the aliens on the screen. He had spent years preparing for this moment. Human scientists had found broken alien ships in empty space. They had learned much about council technology by taking these ships apart. The council had weapons that could crack planets in half. Their ships could cross the galaxy in days. They had armies that numbered in the billions. Admiral Sullivan stepped forward to look directly at the aliens on the screen. She had been a soldier for 30 years. She had fought in wars between human nations. She had seen what happened when bullies were allowed to have their way. Behind her calm face, her mind was already working on humanity's response. The war chief showed them more images of destroyed worlds. He seemed to enjoy talking about how his people had killed entire species. He told stories of battles where millions had died. He wanted humans to understand that resistance was hopeless. The council had never lost a war. They had never been defeated by anyone. But Jake Morrison remembered something his grandfather had told him long ago. His grandfather had fought in wars on Earth before humans reached the stars. He had said that the biggest mistake any enemy could make was thinking that humans would give up just because the odds were bad. Humans had a long history of fighting when they should have surrendered. They had won battles they should have lost. The communication ended, and the screen went dark. The bridge was quiet for a long moment. Everyone knew that humanity faced the greatest threat in its history. The Council had weapons and ships that humans could barely imagine. They had conquered the entire galaxy. They had never been stopped by anyone. Sarah Blake looked at her captain and waited for orders. Dr. Carter checked his recording equipment and made sure everything had been saved. Admiral Sullivan stood with her hands behind her back and stared at the empty screen. Each of them knew that the next few hours would determine whether humanity would survive as a free species or become slaves to alien masters. The choice seemed impossible. Fight and die or surrender and become slaves forever. But Jake Morrison smiled for the first time that day. He knew something that the Council did not know. He knew that when you corner a human and give them no good choices, they have a habit of making their own choice. And that choice usually surprised everyone. News of humanity's impossible reply traveled faster than light across the galaxy. On thousands of alien worlds, beings who had lived under Council rule for their entire lives gathered around public information displays. They watched the same impossible scene over and over again. A species barely out of its own solar system had looked at the most powerful empire in galactic history and said no. The Altarian ambassador's tentacles writhed in patterns of disbelief as she contacted the Kepler Federation's representative through secure channels. Her bioluminescent patches flickered rapidly, showing her emotional state to anyone who could read her species' body language. She transmitted her thoughts in the mathematical language that diplomats used for private conversations. The message was simple but filled with confusion. The humans appeared to have lost all sense of reason. Did they not understand the fate that awaited species who defied the Council? The historical records were clear and terrible. The Vorthon Empire had possessed technology almost as advanced as the Council's own forces. They had controlled 47 star systems and commanded fleets of nearly 1,000 ships. When they had refused to pay increased tribute, the Council had turned every one of their worlds into lifeless rocks within a single year. The Crystalline Confederation had been even more powerful. Their living ships had been beautiful to behold, and deadly in combat. They had mastered the art of growing technology rather than building it. Their weapons had been works of art that could reshape matter at the atomic level. Yet when they had declared independence from Council rule, they had lasted less than 6 months before their entire species was extinct. But as intelligence reports filtered through the galaxy's vast information networks, observers began to notice something strange about the human response. The colonies were not descending into panic as expected. Instead of chaos and desperate evacuation attempts, there was organization and preparation. It was as if humanity had been planning for this confrontation for decades. Commander Rachel Stone stood in the command center of Titan Base, humanity's primary military installation in the outer colonies. Around her, holographic displays showed the defensive positions of 17 different worlds. Each planet glowed with the signatures of weapon emplacements, shield generators, and mobile defense platforms. What had appeared to be simple mining colonies and farming settlements were revealing themselves to be fortified military positions. The truth was that humanity had been preparing for this day ever since their deep space sensors had first detected signs of galactic civilization. Every colonial ship that had left Earth's solar system had carried not just settlers and supplies, but also weapons, military advisors, and detailed plans for planetary defense. Every new world had been chosen not just for its resources or habitability, but for its strategic value in a potential war. Captain Steve Parker transmitted his latest findings from the research vessel Discovery to Fleet Headquarters. His team had spent years studying wreckage from Council ships found drifting in the void between stars. The alien vessels were impressive in their raw power, but their designs had not changed for thousands of years. The Council had become comfortable in their dominance and had stopped innovating. The human analysis revealed critical weaknesses in Council military doctrine. Their ships were built for intimidation rather than efficiency. Their weapon systems were powerful but slow to recharge. Most importantly, their tactical formations were rigid and ceremonial, designed more for impressive displays than for actual combat effectiveness. Dr. Alex Carter's xenobiology teams had made an even more important discovery. The Council species had evolved on worlds where they had been apex predators with no natural enemies. They had never developed the survival instincts that came from being prey. Humans, on the other hand, had evolved on a world filled with dangerous predators. Every human carried the genetic memory of ancestors who had survived by being clever, adaptable, and willing to fight against impossible odds. On the Council's homeworlds, emergency sessions were called to address the unprecedented situation. The war chief of the Thrakari paced before a gathering of military leaders from all 12 Council species. His scarred hide showed the results of countless battles against other alien races. He had never encountered a species that refused to acknowledge superior force. The reptilian commander reviewed the standard procedures for dealing with rebellious species. First came the demand for submission, backed by overwhelming displays of power. This had always been sufficient to ensure compliance. No species had ever progressed to the second stage, which involved limited military action to demonstrate the futility of resistance. The third stage, complete annihilation, had only been theoretical until now. But the humans had not followed the expected pattern. Instead of begging for mercy or attempting to negotiate better terms, they had simply refused and begun preparing for war. Intelligence reports showed that human colonies were transforming themselves with remarkable speed. Civilian infrastructure was being converted to military purposes. Population centers were being fortified. Most disturbing of all, the humans seemed confident rather than desperate. The prime speaker of the Zephyrian race called for calm among the council members. Its crystalline form projected patterns of light that conveyed reassurance to the other alien leaders. The humans were clearly suffering from a form of species-wide madness brought on by their isolation and primitive development. Once they witnessed the true power of the council's punishment fleet, they would return to sanity and beg for the mercy they should have requested from the beginning. Meanwhile, human military commanders worked around the clock to coordinate their impossible defense. Admiral Kate Sullivan established her headquarters on Titan Station, where she could oversee the deployment of humanity's entire fleet. The numbers were not encouraging. Humanity possessed fewer than 400 military vessels of all classes, from small patrol craft to massive battleships like the Liberty. General Connor Hayes coordinated with resistance cells that had been secretly organized on every human world. These groups had been created during the early days of colonial expansion, when humanity's leaders had realized they were not alone in the galaxy. If the space-based defenses failed, every human world would become a battleground where the population would fight street by street and house by house. The human strategy was based on a simple principle that had served their species well throughout history. When facing a superior enemy, do not fight the battle they expect. Human tacticians had studied every available record of Council military operations. The aliens fought wars like formal duels, with elaborate rules and predictable patterns. They had never faced an opponent who would ignore those rules completely. Lieutenant Sarah Blake intercepted Council communications and translated them for the human command staff. The alien discussions revealed a disturbing pattern. The Council leaders spoke of humans the way humans might discuss an infestation of insects. They saw the coming conflict not as a war between equals, but as an extermination operation to remove a minor annoyance. This attitude would prove to be the Council's greatest weakness. They had ruled for so long without challenge that they had forgotten how to fight a real war. Their ships were crewed by beings who had never faced an enemy willing to die rather than surrender. Their commanders had never needed to adapt their tactics to counter unexpected strategies. As the Council's punishment fleet gathered in the void between galaxies, human colonies completed their transformation into military fortresses. Miners became soldiers, farmers became guerrilla fighters, and engineers became weapon designers. An entire species prepared to face annihilation rather than accept slavery. The galaxy watched and waited. Some alien species hoped secretly that the humans might somehow succeed. They remembered what freedom had felt like before the Council's rise to power. Others prepared to offer tribute and submission to ensure they would not be associated with humanity's rebellion. But across human space there was no doubt or hesitation. From the great cities of Earth to the smallest mining outposts on distant worlds, humanity had made its choice. They would stand and fight, regardless of the odds. The next morning brought news that spread across every human world in the galaxy. Television stations, radio broadcasts, and computer networks all carried the same message. People stopped what they were doing to watch their screens. Workers in factories put down their tools. Children in schools sat quietly in their classrooms. Everyone knew that their leaders were about to announce humanity's response to the Council's demands. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood behind a wooden podium in the United Nations building on Earth. The room was filled with reporters and government officials from every human colony. Behind her stood President Elena Rodriguez and General Connor Hayes. Their faces were serious but showed no fear. Large screens on the walls displayed maps of human space and the positions of military fleets. Dr. Alex Carter had spent the entire night studying the information they had gathered about the Council. His computers had analyzed every detail of the alien transmission. The results confirmed what human scientists had suspected for years. The Council's technology was much more advanced than anything humans possessed. Their weapons could destroy entire planets. Their ships were faster and stronger than human vessels. In a direct fight, humanity would lose badly. The Admiral began to speak. Her voice was calm and clear. She did not sound like someone who was about to surrender her people to alien masters. She told the watching billions about the Council's demands. She explained that the aliens wanted tribute, submission, and slaves. She made sure everyone understood exactly what the Council was asking for. Then she paused. The silence stretched across human space. On distant colonies, families gathered around their screens and waited. On military ships, crews stopped their work to listen. Even the children seemed to understand that this moment would shape their future. The Admiral looked directly into the cameras. Her next words would be heard on every human world and transmitted instantly to the Council's home planets. There would be no taking them back once they were spoken. She said one word. No. That single word echoed through space and time. It carried the weight of humanity's entire history. It spoke of every battle humans had fought for freedom. It remembered every time someone had stood up to a bully. It honored every person who had died rather than kneel to a master. On the bridge of the Liberty, Captain Jake Morrison smiled when he heard the response. Lieutenant Sarah Blake sent the transmission to every corner of the galaxy using the Council's own communication networks. Around the ship, crew members like Engineer Paul Johnson and Security Chief Lisa Morgan prepared for what they all knew would come next. The Council's response arrived within minutes. The crystal being called the Prime Speaker appeared on screens throughout human space. For the first time in the creature's long life, it seemed confused. Its many eyes flickered, as if it could not believe what it had heard. The alien asked if there had been some mistake in translation. Had humans really said no to the Council's demands? Did they not understand what would happen if they refused? For 10,000 years, no species had ever defied the Council's will. The very idea seemed impossible to the alien's mind. Admiral Sullivan stepped closer to the camera. Her voice was steady as she confirmed humanity's answer. There had been no mistake. The answer was no. No tribute would be paid. No ships would be surrendered. No humans would become slaves. If the Council wanted to take these things by force, they were welcome to try. The news of humanity's refusal spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. On thousands of alien worlds, beings gathered to hear the impossible news. A young species from a small corner of space had told the mighty Council to go away. It was the most shocking thing that had happened in galactic history. The Altarian ambassador contacted other species representatives in secret messages. Her tentacles moved in patterns that showed disbelief and fear. She asked if the humans had lost their minds. Did they not know what had happened to other species that had defied the Council? The Vorthan Empire had been turned to dust. The crystalline Confederation had been wiped from existence, but as reports came in from across human space, a different picture began to form. The human colonies were not panicking. Instead of running or hiding, they were getting ready to fight. It was as if they had been preparing for this day for many years. Commander Rachel Stone led the defense forces in the outer colonies. She worked with local militias on 17 different worlds. Each colony had been built not just as a place to live, but as a fortress. Every adult human had basic military training. Every factory could be converted to make weapons within hours. Every civilian transport ship could become a warship if needed. Captain Steve Parker commanded a human research vessel called the Discovery. His job had been to study pieces of alien technology found floating in space. Over the years, his team had learned many secrets about Council weapons and ships. They had discovered that the aliens had not improved their technology for thousands of years. The Council had become lazy after ruling unopposed for so long. On Earth, General Hayes coordinated with secret resistance groups that had been organized on every human world. If the Council somehow broke through the space defenses, they would not find helpless civilians waiting to be conquered. They would find an entire species ready to fight for every city, every building, and every room. The Council's military leaders held emergency meetings on their homeworlds. They had never faced a situation like this before. For millennia, other species had begged for mercy or tried to negotiate better terms. None had ever simply refused to obey. The Council's war machines were designed to intimidate enemies into surrender, not to fight prolonged battles. Meanwhile, human engineers worked around the clock to prepare their defenses. Mining ships were converted into mobile weapon platforms. Civilian space stations were turned into military bases. Even passenger ships were fitted with weapons and armor. Every human who could hold a weapon was given one and taught how to use it. The galaxy watched in amazement as humanity transformed itself into a war machine in just a few days. Other species that had been conquered by the Council thousands of years ago remembered what freedom had felt like. They began to wonder if these strange humans might actually have a chance against their ancient oppressors. But the Council's response was swift and terrible. The war chief announced that a massive punishment fleet was being assembled. 3,000 ships would travel to human space to teach the galaxy what happened to those who defied the Council's will. The humans would be made an example that would be remembered for 10,000 years. As news of the approaching fleet reached human space, Admiral Sullivan called another meeting of the military command. This time her message was for the soldiers and sailors who would soon face impossible odds in battle. She reminded them that they fought not just for their own lives, but for the right of all thinking beings to live free from oppression. The Admiral's final words became the battle cry that would echo through human space in the days to come. They want us to kneel. We choose to stand. They want us to surrender our freedom. We choose to fight for it. They think we will break under pressure. They are about to learn what happens when you threaten a human's family. 3 months after the first battle, the war that had shaken the foundations of galactic civilization came to an end. The final engagement took place in the Proxima Centauri system, where Admiral Kate Sullivan personally led the combined human fleet in what would be remembered as the most decisive military victory in recorded history. The battle lasted for 2 days and ended with the Eternal Judgment, the Council's ultimate symbol of power, floating dead in space with its command structure shattered and its weapons silenced forever. The war had not gone as anyone expected. The Council's vast fleets, designed to intimidate through displays of overwhelming force rather than fight determined enemies, had proven no match for human tactics that emphasized speed, flexibility, and the willingness to take casualties in exchange for strategic advantage. Species that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years found themselves outmaneuvered by newcomers who had barely mastered space travel a few centuries earlier. But humanity's true genius revealed itself not in their military victories, but in what they chose to do with those victories. When President Elena Rodriguez stepped before the cameras to address the galaxy after the Council's surrender, her words carried implications that would reshape galactic civilization for generations to come. She announced that humanity had no intention of replacing the Council as the galaxy's new masters. The humans had not fought this war to become oppressors themselves, but to ensure that no species would ever again be forced to kneel before alien rulers. The very concept seemed so radical that many alien leaders initially dismissed it as impossible. Propaganda. The truth became clear during the peace negotiations held at Alpha Centauri Station, a neutral facility constructed specifically for these historic meetings. Representatives from hundreds of species that had lived under Council rule for millennia gathered to witness something that had never happened before in galactic history: the voluntary dissolution of an empire by its conquerors. Dr. Alex Carter had spent the war years studying not just Council military capabilities, but their entire governmental structure. His research revealed the truth about the galactic empire that had seemed so invincible. It was dying from within, slowly collapsing under the weight of its own corruption and stagnation. The tribute system had created a civilization where innovation was actively discouraged, where entire species existed only to serve their masters, and where fear was the only force holding the empire together. The Council races themselves were victims of their own system. The Zephyrian Prime Speaker, once freed from the rigid hierarchies that had governed its species for millennia, admitted that its people had not developed new technology or explored new ideas for over 3,000 years. They had become prisoners of their own success, trapped in patterns of behavior that prevented growth or change. Captain Jake Morrison, promoted to Fleet Admiral after his heroic leadership during the war, worked directly with former Council military commanders to establish a new defensive alliance. The organization would be based on voluntary cooperation between equals rather than domination by a single power. Species that chose to join would contribute according to their abilities and receive protection according to their needs. The transformation was not immediate or easy. Entire civilizations had to learn how to make decisions without seeking permission from higher authorities. Species that had been slaves for thousands of years struggled to understand concepts like self-determination and democratic governance. Former Council overseers had to accept that their subjects were now equals with the right to make their own choices. The Altarian ambassador, who had been among the first to establish diplomatic contact with humanity after their victory, became a leading advocate for the new system. Her species had possessed advanced technology and sophisticated culture before the Council's rise to power, but had been reduced to tribute-paying servants over the centuries. Under human guidance, they began to rediscover their own heritage and capabilities. Some species initially resisted the changes. The Thrakari war chief attempted to maintain his people's military traditions by establishing an independent empire in the outer regions of the galaxy. But without the Council's support structure, and faced with determined opposition from the new alliance, his forces were defeated within months. The war chief himself eventually accepted exile rather than face trial for war crimes committed during the Council era. The most dramatic changes occurred among species that had been completely enslaved by the Council. Entire races that had been reduced to manual labor or resource extraction suddenly found themselves free to pursue their own interests. Many chose to join the alliance as full partners, contributing their unique skills and knowledge to the common good. The new galactic motto inscribed on every ship and facility belonging to the alliance consisted of the same word that had started the transformation, but now it carried a different meaning. Not defiance born of desperation, but confidence, born of principle. The word no had become a symbol of the right of all thinking beings to determine their own destiny. Trade and cultural exchange flourished under the new system in ways that had been impossible during the Council era. Species that had been forbidden to interact except through Council intermediaries began to share technology, art, and ideas directly. Scientific research accelerated as different alien perspectives combined to solve problems that had stagnated for centuries. The humans established academies throughout the galaxy where alien species could learn the principles of democratic governance, individual rights, and cooperative problem-solving. These institutions became centers of learning and innovation that attracted the most talented individuals from hundreds of different worlds. Military conflicts did not disappear entirely, but they were handled through negotiation and limited intervention, rather than the complete annihilation that had characterized the Council era. When disputes arose between member species, Alliance peacekeepers worked to find solutions that respected the rights and interests of all parties involved. Admiral Sullivan often reflected on the profound changes that had swept across the galaxy in such a short time. When historians from various species asked her what had made humanity different from all the races that had submitted to the Council over the millennia, her answer became one of the most quoted statements in galactic history. She explained that humans had said no because they meant it completely. They had been willing to face total destruction rather than live as slaves because freedom was more important to them than survival itself. This was not exceptional bravery or unique courage, she insisted, but simply what it meant to be human. The galaxy that emerged from the ashes of the Council Empire bore little resemblance to the rigid hierarchy that had existed for 10,000 years. In its place stood a community of equals, united not by fear or force but by shared principles and mutual respect. Species that had never been allowed to speak for themselves found their voices. Civilizations that had been reduced to servitude rediscovered their heritage and dignity. The Council had demanded tribute and submission from humanity. The humans had replied with a single word that changed everything. But the real transformation had come not from that moment of defiance but from humanity's decision to build something better. From the ruins of the old order, they had proven that strength without compassion was merely brutality, and that true power came from lifting others up rather than holding them down. The new galactic civilization faced many challenges and would encounter many more in the years to come. But it would face them as free beings working together by choice, rather than as slaves serving masters who had forgotten that all thinking creatures deserved the right to choose their own path among the stars. The Council's punishment fleet materialized at the edge of human space exactly 1 week after humanity's refusal. The massive armada stretched across millions of kilometers of void, its ships arranged in the perfect geometric formations that had intimidated countless species into submission over the millennia. 3,000 vessels of war hung in the darkness between stars, their weapons charged and ready to deliver the Council's final judgment. At the fleet's center floated the Eternal Judgment, a ship so large it could be seen from the surface of nearby planets. This mobile fortress served as the Council's ultimate symbol of power, carrying enough firepower to reduce entire solar systems to cosmic dust. Its crystalline hull reflected the light of distant stars, while energy fields powerful enough to tear apart matter danced along its surface. Admiral Kate Sullivan watched the enemy approach from her command center on Titan Station. The humans had chosen this asteroid base as their primary military headquarters because it offered the best view of the approaches to Earth's solar system. Around her, dozens of officers monitored displays showing the positions of both fleets. The numbers told a grim story that would have discouraged any rational military commander. The human fleet consisted of fewer than 400 ships. Most were relatively small vessels designed for patrol duties or colony support operations. Only a handful could be considered true warships in the traditional sense. Against them came an armada that outnumbered them nearly 8-1, with individual ships that possessed more firepower than entire human battle groups. But Admiral Sullivan smiled as she studied the tactical displays. The Council had made their first mistake by approaching human space in the same formal manner they had used against every previous enemy. Their ships maintained perfect spacing and moved in predictable patterns that had not changed for thousands of years. They were treating this encounter as a ceremonial execution rather than a real battle. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the forward elements of the human fleet from the Bridge of the Liberty. His ship led a battle group that included the destroyers, New York and Chicago, commanded by Captains Amy Foster and Greg Thompson, respectively. Behind them followed dozens of smaller vessels, each one crewed by humans who had volunteered for what everyone expected to be a suicide mission. The first engagement began near Jupiter's massive bulk. A Council squadron of 15 heavy cruisers, led by a Zephyrian fleet commander, moved to intercept the human vanguard. The alien commander transmitted the traditional demand for immediate surrender, followed by a list of the honors that would be accorded to enemies who yielded without further resistance. Jake Morrison's response was not transmitted through official channels. Instead, the human ship suddenly accelerated to attack speed and spread into a formation that the Council forces had never seen before. Rather than maintaining the orderly battle lines that characterized galactic warfare, The human vessels darted and weaved through space like a pack of hunting animals. What followed stunned observers throughout the galaxy. The Liberty, despite being outmassed 5-1 by its opponents, disabled 3 Council cruisers in the opening moments of combat. Human weapons, while less powerful than their alien counterparts, were fired with a precision and coordination that the Council ships could not match. Every shot was aimed at critical systems, rather than attempting to destroy entire vessels through brute force. The human tactics seemed chaotic to alien observers, but they followed principles that had been developed through thousands of years of warfare on Earth. Small units operated independently while maintaining overall coordination. They concentrated their firepower on single targets, used asteroids and debris as cover, and struck at unexpected angles before disappearing back into the void. Lieutenant Sarah Blake monitored Council communications and provided real-time translation to the human fleet. The alien commanders were calling for immediate reinforcements while describing the human attack patterns as impossible to predict. They used terms that translated roughly as chaos warriors and void demons to describe enemies who refused to follow the established rules of civilized warfare. The Council's rigid command structure worked against them in the face of human adaptability. Alien captains required permission from higher authorities before deviating from standard tactical doctrines. By the time orders could be processed through the proper channels, human ships had already moved to new positions and begun fresh attacks. Commander Tony Wright led a squadron of human light cruisers in a daring assault on a Council dreadnought that had been isolated from its escorts. His ships attacked from 6 different directions simultaneously, their weapons targeting the giant vessel's sensor arrays and communication systems. The alien crew found themselves blind and unable to coordinate with friendly forces while human missiles struck their weapon ports with surgical precision. The battle raged for 18 hours across the entire outer system. Human casualties were severe, with nearly a quarter of their fleet destroyed or heavily damaged. But the Council forces suffered losses that shocked their commanders and sent waves of disbelief through the galactic community. Over 200 alien warships had been destroyed or disabled by an enemy they had expected to sweep aside without difficulty. The Thrakari war chief aboard the Eternal Judgment watched the battle reports with growing fury. His species had conquered dozens of star systems through overwhelming displays of military might. Never before had his forces been outfought by what he considered primitive barbarians who had barely learned to leave their home planet. But the EI reports continued to arrive, each one more impossible than the last. Human ships were demonstrating capabilities that should not have existed. They moved faster and turned more sharply than Council vessels of similar size. Their crews made tactical decisions in seconds that would require minutes of analysis by alien command structures. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to anticipate Council movements before the orders were given. Dr. Alex Carter had provided the human fleet with detailed analysis of Council communication protocols. Human code breakers had learned to intercept and decode alien battle orders, giving their commanders advance warning of enemy movements. This intelligence advantage, combined with human tactical flexibility, created a devastating combination that the Council had never encountered. Captain Steve Parker led a group of converted civilian vessels in attacks on Council supply lines. His ships, originally designed for cargo transport and mining operations, had been fitted with weapons and armor in the weeks before the battle. They struck at Council logistics ships and communication relays, disrupting the alien fleet's ability to coordinate its massive formations. The psychological impact of the battle extended far beyond the immediate casualties. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a species had not only refused to surrender to the Council, but had actually hurt them in open combat. Across the galaxy, subject races that had served as slaves for millennia began to whisper among themselves about the impossible humans who dared to fight their oppressors. As the first day of battle drew to a close, Admiral Sullivan received damage reports from across her fleet. The numbers were sobering but not as catastrophic as she had expected. Human losses stood at 37 ships destroyed and dozens more damaged. But the Council had lost over 200 vessels, including several of their most powerful dreadnoughts. More importantly, The human fleet had learned valuable lessons about Council tactics and capabilities. Their enemies were powerful, but predictable, dangerous but not invincible. The alien crews were skilled but had never faced opponents who fought with the desperate creativity of a species defending its freedom. The war chief called for a temporary withdrawal to regroup and develop new tactics. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Council's military machine had been forced to retreat from a battle. The humans had won the first engagement of a war that would reshape the galaxy. But Admiral Sullivan knew that this was only the beginning. The Council would return with new strategies and overwhelming numbers. The next battle would determine whether humanity's victory had been a lucky accident or the first sign of a new era in galactic history.